everyone. Welcome to the Euphoria After-Show. This is going to be a 2-episode podcast. We're taking episode 1 to discuss episodes 1 through 4 of the actual show. I'm joined here by my co-host, Joel Shirey, making his debut podcasting co-host turn with me here. Joel, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Rishabh. Hi, everyone. This is Joel. I'm an old friend of Rishabh's, and I'm really excited that he invited me to co-host this podcast episode, and I'm really excited to dig into this new season of this show, and yeah.
You're honored to be here on this prestigious podcast of mine.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
It's
perfect.
it's an honor.
Yes, great. So as Joel mentioned, we're talking about season 2 of the show. We've obviously only gotten up to episodes 1 through 4, which is how much has been released, so far. And we'll be probably doing a second podcast episode to wrap up the show and talk about episodes 5 through 8, as well as the entire season later on. So make sure that you've watched the first 4 episodes of Euphoria, because we will go into spoiler territory with this podcast episode. And as always, just a quick reminder that, Euphoria is for mature audiences. It deals with a lot of difficult subjects. So keep that in mind. I think Zendaya herself put out a content advisory. So, if you're at all sensitive about some of the topics that the show covers, proceed with caution as always with Euphoria. So Joel, let's just start off with you whenever you're ready. What were your thoughts going into the second season? And you can obviously talk about what you thought about the last season and just what you were expecting from this particular season. So go ahead.
Yeah, so um they ended last season with many cliffhangers as they always do because they want to suck you back in to watch the next season. So I was definitely excited to see the continuation of the plot and see how the cliffhangers left at the end of season 1 were resolved. For example, we had the rift between Rue and Jules, and then of course the whole nasty web of lies and secrets with Nate and Jules and the police and everything. So I was definitely excited to see um, sort of some resolution to that tension. And then I was absolutely excited to just see more of the good writing and the good visual techniques, the artistic camera work, and unique costuming and makeup that make the show visually appealing. Um, so that was what I was most excited for coming into season 2. Those were the two things I would say.
Right. And then, I mean, I agree with you. And you talked about some of the cliffhangers that they left on season 1. Obviously, you mentioned Rue and Jules and that whole situation. At the very end of the first season, again, make sure you've seen the first season as well here, because we're going to be spoiling that as well. There is a lot of tension between Rue and Jules' characters, who are basically two of the biggest characters on the show. And we see Jules leaving Rue at a train station, and it's this very big moment in the first season, and then it's basically implied at the very end that Rue is once again using, right? And she's kind of slipping back into her addiction. And I think a lot of people had really, really strong reactions to the end of the first season. They either felt very strongly, towards Rue and Jules' relationship, one way or the other. So Joel, I want to ask you, this has been one of like the internet's biggest debates, but at the end of season 1, if you try and get your brain to like just the information you knew at the end of the first season, as a viewer, did you feel that Rue's character and Jules' character had a relationship that was worth preserving, or do you feel like maybe they shouldn't have been together?
Well, I enjoyed watching them being together. I enjoyed the story and watching the emotions of them being together, but um it is stressful to watch a codependent relationship, and I think that their relationship was extremely unhealthy.
Hmm.
And we saw that towards the end of season one, where Jules was feeling an excessive burden for sort of, she felt responsible to sort of keep Rue sober. And Rue
Right.
doesn't seem to feel any reason on her own to stay sober. She doesn't love herself enough to do it for herself. She only was doing it for Rue. And she wouldn't even do it for her own sister or her own mother. She was only doing it for Rue. And she said that.
Or
And
Jules, I mean.
so, I mean,
Or
yes. So she,
yeah,
exactly, yes. And so I do think their relationship was very unhealthy, but
right.
I knew we had to see them get back together for the plot to move on and to, you know, to to sort of get a good show. And I thought that maybe things could be better in the future for them. So I would say maybe I supported their decision, Jules's decision to leave at that moment, but I I did have some part of me that sort of knew they had to get back together and kind of wanted to see that.
Yeah, I was actually watching an interview with the creator of the show, Sam Levinson, and he had mentioned, with Zendaya and probably Hunter Schaefer as well, that they actually saw all that discussion on the internet happening about whether Jules is a villain or not. And I think, based on the interview that I saw, they were a little bit surprised to see that a lot of the internet and certainly Twitter and all these places had kind of labeled Jules as a villain. And I know that Sam Levinson had written Jules' character in order to serve as sort of a light in the show. And I think it kind of, I don't want to say backfired, but I think the audience had a very polarized reaction to her character. And I think they became really cognizant of that and wanted to maybe, show Jules in a very different light. And I think that's also why, we got, the depiction of Jules that we see in the special episode, the second special episode. So, Joel, now that we're here on the special episodes, just quickly run me through your thoughts about both of the special episodes, what you thought, and then I'll go ahead and share my own thoughts on them.
Well, first of all, when I was watching the first special episode, I just said to myself, this is some of the best writing I have ever seen
Right.
in a movie or television show because I was very much enthralled and glued to the screen, and yet it was just two actors in one set. So it was just dialogue that was sucking you in, which is amazing. And I think that the first special episode, we sort of see, I think we see a lot of things that we already knew about Rue, which is that she doesn't care enough about herself or even her family to stay sober to try to sort of rebuild her life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think she says in the show like, "Oh, you probably hate me by now." But in the special, she talks about, you know, um, how her father died and just kind of her view of the world, and you kind of see things more from her perspective, and you
Yeah.
can kind of understand like, well, when you're addicted, that's just how it is. And a lot of people could be that way when they're addicted because that's how destructive addiction really is. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think they get into that a lot in the first special episode. And then the second one, um, I loved how they went a little bit more in depth into Jules's psychology and her relationship with gender expression. And of course, on top of that, we also see um the more things that were going on during the time of season one where
Yeah,
we see that there were other things going on in her life and we kind of feel more bad for her um,
yeah,
and kind of have more sympathy for her.
yeah, exactly. I echo all your thoughts. For me, definitely the first special episode was a standout. I still think that's one of the best episodes across both seasons so far. And that's definitely props to Sam Levinson as a writer and a director, but also largely to, Zendaya and Coleman Domingo, who play Rue and Ellie respectively, making a conversation at a coffee table that engaging and intriguing and interesting. I think that really is credit to the writing there and the performances. And I absolutely agree with you that we get to see Rue in a very, very, I guess, different light than we've seen her before. We get to see her really open up in a way that we haven't really seen. She always has, even, through the worst and the thick of the season, she sort of has this, I want to say, sense of humor that maybe is covering up some of the really big dark holes in her life. And we get to really see those become a little bit more exposed and come to light. I know Sam Levinson put it very, very well when he said that, and I think Zendaya said this too, actually, that in a way, Ali's character sees right through Rue because he's been on that journey before, and so he has this ability to see through all the kind of BS that she's putting on half the time, and he sees the real human inside of her, and I think that's a really interesting way of putting it. As for Jules' special episode, I agree with everything you said. I think it was a very strong way to show a perspective shift. You know, I think that really came as an episode, as a kind of direct reaction to some of the almost hate that Jules' character was getting on the internet. It's sort of interesting to see that, Jules had a lot of her own traumas and that the addiction that Rue was suffering with was really putting, quite a bit of a burden on her as well. And I think some of that also traces into season two. So thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. And so here's our plan for discussing season two. And Joel, feel free to add anything to this. But what I want to do is I really want to go through the list of the main players here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the character name and the person who plays that character. And I just want to invite you to basically talk about what you're thinking about their journey so far in episodes 1 through 4. And, you can keep this as open ended as you want. Tell me what you think about their character, their decisions, their storylines. And of course, you can talk about what you're thinking about each performance as you go down. And I'm using Wikipedia for the character list. So it's going to be sort of a weird order to go in, but hopefully it makes it a little bit more interesting. So it won't just be like all the main characters first and then, the supporting players next. It's a good mix. So, first character, Joel, is unsurprisingly Zendaya as Rue. Tell me what you're thinking about, in episodes 1 through 4. There's definitely a lot of things to be concerned about.
Yeah, so in episodes one through four, obviously she is using again,
Right.
and um, she's also keeping it a secret, which is not surprising for her. She did that at certain points last season, but I don't know if she's really gone this long just using and keeping it a secret, especially from Jules.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, I think I think compared to last season, she hasn't really changed much during the course of the first few seasons. I mean, she's sort of just she's sort of just, an addict who's using, who's not planning on changing, and it's sort
Yeah.
of everyone else around her who is having their own reactions to that. And then, although one thing I will point out is that she definitely treated Ali worse than she ever had before. In one,
Yeah.
was it
Uh,
episode 3
I want to
when
say
she
it's episode
really,
3, yeah. When she kind of just
yeah,
goes for him emotionally.
yeah, she attacks him in a very sensitive area, and it's really hard to watch. And I think we didn't see anything that that bad from her in the first season. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. I think it's for her character, it's really been written as definitely nothing getting better, if not worse, honestly. The spiral of addiction definitely is getting worse for her in many ways. And Rue, who is actually based loosely on Sam Levinson's own life, I think is a really strong portrayal of drug addiction. I'm not sure I've seen something this honest and perceptive before in any film or television show that I've come across, and Zendaya does it with just absolute mastery, to be honest. Like, there's no two ways about that. She's absolutely phenomenal in being this person and being this character in a truest form, because one of the things that I really appreciate about the show is that drug addiction is not something that is always, and I want to use the right words here, but it doesn't always feel crippling to the person who's actually doing drugs. The people who are using can have these moments of amazing euphoria, right? I mean, they can enjoy using, they can be having all these effects but not realizing what they're doing to themselves and to others. And there's this one particularly good sequence where Rue is explaining to the audience, breaking the fourth wall there for a second and talking about how to effectively hide your drug addiction from your loved ones. And it's sort of a heartbreaking moment because as an external viewer, you feel terrible for her that she's psychologically manipulating everyone, and she thinks this way. But from her perspective, I think the show captures her perspective very well, where she feels like she's doing this very strategically and in a really smart way. I don't know what you thought about that moment, Joel.
Yeah, I liked that. I loved the scene where they broke the fourth wall, which paralleled a scene from the previous season. And I think it was funny. It's good storytelling.
Yep.
It's sad and twisted, but ironically funny.
Yep. And I think
And
that goes for
yeah,
the entire season so far. There's kind of been like a stronger like sprinkle of humor here, like a very, very dark, warped humor than I think the first season had. And I think when it's used for Rue's character in particular in that way, it's pretty shattering because of how we've seen her grow or progress as a character, I should say, to see her kind of falling back into that. So that's not the only thing I think that's going on with Rue. I think there's definitely a lot going on in terms of the writing for the season with Jules that we can get into when we reach Jules' character as well. But I want to move forward to the next character on this list I have open here, and that is Lexi Howard, played by Maud Apatow. I think this is Lexi's best set of episodes in forever, she's really getting the limelight here. There's a lot going on. Joel, have you start on that.
yeah, I think in last season she was a very passive character.
Yeah.
She was sort of a plot device. She helped Rue pass a drug test. She sort of acts as a voice of reason for Cassie, but she doesn't really take any action
Mm-hmm.
herself. But in this season, it's very clear that she decides to take action at one point. For example, she puts on, kind of a sexy outfit and goes to Fez's convenience store, and that's like a big moment for her. And then she like writes an entire play and is putting it on. So she's actually like doing something, and it's exciting to see that. Um, so far I feel like it's been a lot of setup for her plot line,
Yeah.
and I'm just excited to see where it goes, but it seems like, um she's just starting to really like take action when she feels something instead of just saying something.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the way they're, handling Lexi's character in this season is really, really interesting and kind of funny almost in many parts. Obviously, we have another side, or another, I should say, development where we get to see, the fourth wall is broken and the writing sees Lexi kind of addressing the audience as a filmmaker, because it's kind of implied in the show that she sees herself as very much an observer to everything that's happening around her life. And I know there's certain psychological terms for this as well, but I think Sam Levinson and the entire crew and cast did a phenomenal job of just like making a really, really interesting play with that character. Do you agree, Joel?
I do agree. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next character here. This is Fezco, played by Angus Cloud. I think there's a lot going on here as well. Joel, you can start us off.
Yes, I think the biggest thing we're learning about Fez is how he acts sort of as a father or a loving older brother to um
Ashtray.
Ashtray, exactly. So Ashtray seems to have very violent and impulsive tendencies,
Yeah.
and and Fez has to cover for him by taking the blame, basically.
Mhm.
We they've barely hinted at this, but basically he Ashtray killed whatever that guy's name was. I don't remember his name.
Yeah, neither
The
do
guy
I.
who the guy who fed Rue fentanyl.
Right.
So Ashtray killed him, and Fez has sort of taken responsibility for it because I think when he's at that drug dealer's house in the first episode, that drug dealer who's just like a mom, like a 40-year-old mom, I
Yeah.
can't remember her name either.
No, yeah.
He's like, "Oh," she's like, "What happened to this guy?" And he's like, "Oh, I didn't like how he did business." And then just now at the end of this episode, that random guy who's also in episode one, like Fezco, like some other like drug dealer who we saw in episode one of season two, comes and he's like, "Oh, that guy's baby mama came and she's asking all kinds of stupid questions." And Fez is like, "Oh shit." Like,
Yeah. That's like the last
so like
nugget of information we get.
Fez is having to like protect Ashtray. And I think that's really interesting because it sort of shows him as somewhat of like a father or a protector,
Yeah.
which is different from last season.
Yeah, and I mean, Euphoria is known for its cold opens, and the first episode of the second season starts with Fezco's cold open and his backstory. And it's really one of the best, pieces of filmmaking that I've seen in a while. Obviously, I think gangster movies were a big influence in terms of getting the tone for that right. You see a Scarface poster in his cold open, and there's so many of these influences. But yeah, I think we get to see Fezco in a very, very different light in this episode, even with his connections with Lexi's character that we're just beginning to see. We're obviously getting to explore that sensitive side of him, and also getting to see a lot of the very, very obviously traumatic things that he went through as a child, and maybe how that affected his relationship with Ashtray and pretty much all the characters. And that's one of the best things about the show is the cold opens that really give you a sense of the character in a way that you wouldn't get before. So I think Vesco has had a very interesting arc so far, and I'm definitely excited to see what happens in the next set of episodes. So Joel, the next one is a big one. So feel free to take your time with this one because it's Cal Jacobs, played by Eric Dane, who we're seeing, way more of. Definitely, he's been one of the most featured characters, I think, in the second season. He's completely missing from the first episode, but I think that's just, the calm before the storm that we get in episodes 2 through 4. So go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to say about Cal.
Yeah,
So, in his cold open in episode two of season two, I think that cold open is the best cold open so far, in my opinion.
I would agree.
I think that cold open could have been its own like short film
Yeah,
because it
feels
was
like it
really
is.
long and it was almost self-contained in a way.
Yeah,
And okay, so right, so he is a teenager probably in like the 70s.
yeah,
He is presumably bisexual and he has this close best friend who he is also attracted to. And um So that's the setup, and it's like we never knew exactly what his whole story was. Like, um, what was his story of like realizing he was not straight? Like, why did he end up marrying the woman that he married? Like,
Hmm.
why does he not feel fulfilled in his marriage? And we find out basically all of that. We find out that was sort of trapped into marrying her because of her pregnancy. Shortly after, he sort of like externalized his feelings for his friend who was a
Hmm.
guy. I don't remember his
Hmm.
name.
Yeah, I don't either.
And um so now we know that. So we know that there's this history where he, he does enjoy having sex with women, and he did enjoy having sex with his wife, but if things had gone differently, he probably would have chosen to be with that guy. And I think that's the fundamental reason why he is not happy in his marriage, and he has to well, he doesn't have to, but he goes outside of it for satisfaction.
Hmm.
And and then of course in the latest episode,
Hmm.
we see a lot of him in the most recent episode. And so we see him go back to to that same bar where he was dancing with his friend way back when. He's obviously extremely drunk. I think that what we saw from him was just a nervous breakdown,
Hmm.
almost like what we saw last season with Jules, because there was a episode last season where Jules was under so much pressure with her relationship with Rue, and she got drunk at that party, and she just kind of lost it and went insane. And I feel like we're seeing that with Cal now. Like, it's both the alcohol and sort of also the stress that's been piling on him for however many decades, all just kind of come out. And so we're seeing someone who's both like having a nervous breakdown and drunk. And that's why we're seeing him just go so crazy and say such unimaginable things to his family. And it was really remarkable to see. I remember when I was watching the scene where he was talking to his family, to his sons and his wife at the end of the last episode. I was like, part of me was like, is this really realistic? Like, would anyone actually do this under any circumstances? And of course, there's other points in the show where you could say that, but I kind of just realized like, well, that is how much stress he's under. Like the last like 25 years of his marriage, and then the recent development of knowing that his disc is out there somewhere and he doesn't know where. And it was certainly shocking to see him explode like that. I
Hmm.
wasn't expecting something like that to happen.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you've said. And honestly, I think it's really a big credit to the partnership that Eric Dane as a performer has with writer director Sam Levinson to portray Cal Jacobs as a very, very layered, complex, nuanced character and deal with a lot of sensitive topics with a lot of sensitivity. I would totally agree with you that episode three has one of the best cold open. I think, yeah, probably easily the best cold open of both seasons so far. I think Fesco's one was pretty good, but definitely Cal Jacobs' cold open is something else. And I think Euphoria has done a really, really good job of commenting on some really interesting themes through Cal's character, whether that be, like that fragile masculinity that he displays or the repressed kind of sexuality that he's been repressing. And I thought it was done in a very creative, very empathetic way to get to see his story. And then also, in episode four, see the repercussions of and the dangers of living his life the way he does, and for him to explode like that was very shocking. I agree with you that those moments in the show are easily some of the most shocking moments in Euphoria so far. Definitely some of the most intense too. So I think you summarized that pretty well, and that brings us to our next character. Joel, I happen to know for a fact that you like this character a lot, so I'm excited to hear your thoughts about what you think is happening with her in these first four episodes. Any guesses to who it is?
Is it Maddie?
It is Maddie Perez, played by Alexa Demi. So I'll go ahead and let you get started.
You know, I think so far this season we haven't necessarily seen like a new side of Maddie, or we haven't seen Maddie evolve much this season. I think she's
Yeah,
pretty similar to the way she was last season. But what she's grappling with this season is like, is Nate good
yeah,
for her? Does she actually, will she actually benefit from being with him, or were they just miserable all the time? And why does she feel like the desire to get back with him? But at the same
mhm,
time, she's like, but also we were so toxic. And I think, um, yeah, she definitely has this awareness that like, okay, she and Nate were not really that good when they were together. And I think
yeah,
she's brought it up. She asks her friends, like, were Nate and I good, or were we just miserable all the time? And so I feel like deep down, I think she knows that
mhm,
Nate and her are not good. And what's interesting is that I feel like it's a contrast with Cassie, because Cassie kind of doesn't know what's going on. She kind of just gives into her desire, even though even though Cassie and Nate are kind of just as toxic, Cassie
mhm.
is the one who just like gives into her desire. But Maddie sort of realizes like, I I don't really, I feel like she really, on some level she knows that she shouldn't get back with Nate. She's kind of like more self-aware in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'd agree with you. We've seen, I guess, a little bit less of her than we saw in the first season. I think her relationship with Nate was a major focus in the first season. Obviously, the writing has shifted now to focus on Cassie and Nate, which we'll definitely get into. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I don't know if we've seen her evolve much, but we do see her in this sort of questioning phase of like, whether or not it is worth getting back together with Nate. And I think as viewers, we have a pretty strong answer to that question. But, from her perspective, I think it's very easy to understand given her character journey why she still might be questioning whether or not it's worth getting back with him. I think we see her doing, I guess, these babysitting things at these very expensive houses, trying on different clothes, which I thought was a somewhat amusing prospect for her. But yeah, I think we will see more of her character, develop, especially as things begin to probably. My prediction is unravel with Nate and Cassie's relationship. I think it should be interesting to see what happens in the next few episodes. All right, so the next one is, pretty related here. Nate Jacobs, played by Jacob Elordi. I think just before you even start, Joel, I think what Jacob Lordy does as a performer is phenomenal. I just think he transforms himself into such a menacing portrait of a character. I just want to say, like, he's one of my favorite performers in the show, by far. And that's saying a lot in a show that's full of like amazing performances. So, Joel, what do you think about Nate so far?
Yeah. So Nate Nate is kind of put in this position where he kind of has to clean up the mess that his father made.
Mhm.
Um, so the one major plot point is that he knows that one of the discs is missing, the disc that shows Jules and Cal together. And um, we as the viewer know that Maddie took it. I don't I'm not sure if it's clear how whether Nate knows that for sure, but obviously Cal doesn't because Cal thinks that Fez has it.
Yeah.
But Nate might know because he knows that she was in his room and he knows that it went missing from his room. So when Nate is getting back together with Maddie, I think the big question is he really getting back together with Maddie because he actually cares about her, or is he just trying to get closer to her because he wants that disc?
Hmm.
Because I think it's possible that he really likes Cassie and he wishes that he could just like forget about Maddie, but he has to get close to Maddie. I think he's doing it because he wants to get that disc back, or
Hmm.
he doesn't want to like hurt or anger Maddie so bad that she like blackmails him or exposes his father.
Yeah.
Do
I
you
think
think that's reasonable?
I think that's reasonable, and I think what's interesting about Nate's character always is, we could sit here and unpack his, very warped perspectives on life all day. But yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of the same Nate Jacobs that we saw last season, and it's yeah, not great. You would not want to, know this person in real life. He's definitely got a lot to work through. He's got some very, I guess, skewed and or warped, perspectives on the relationships he has, whether that be with Maddie or Cass or anybody throughout the show. And we also see him kind of get beaten up by Fesco in the first episode. That's one of the big highlights of the first episode is sort of that act of violence against Nate. I think we could do a whole separate podcast just on Nate and Cal, but I think we're gonna just go ahead and stop it there. But always something, I don't want to say interesting, but something interesting happening with Nate. And I think, again, credit to Sam Levinson for also portraying his character in a very sensitive and layered way. I think both Nate and Cal's characters are tough characters to write from a writing perspective. So I think, Euphoria has always done a really, really good job of bringing those characters to life. All right, Joel, the next one we have here is sort of an interesting one. This is Kat Hernandez, played by Barbie Ferriera. And before we even get into it, I don't know how much you followed the news, but there have been some reports of maybe some sort of on-set arguments or tiffs between, Barbie as the performer who plays Kat and Sam Levinson, the director. To be very honest, I'm not sure how much of that's confirmed or how many more details are coming through about that. But it's possible that maybe some of her lines were cut as a result. And, obviously I don't know any of the details, but we have seen a lot less of Kat, but we've still seen some interesting aspects from her character. So what do you think so far, Joel?
Yeah. We definitely have seen less of Kat from last season, although even last season, I think that her plot line did not really intertwine with the other characters as much
Yeah.
anyway.
Hmm.
And so in this season, the situation she's in is she's not happy with her boyfriend Ethan. She
Hmm.
finds him too boring. She feels that she should like him because on paper he's a great guy,
Hmm.
but she's just not satisfied. And we see a humorous sort of portrayal of that where we see presumably a Dothraki, which is a reference to Game of Thrones. I feel
Hmm.
like I when I first saw like the silhouette of that character, I was like, they did not get Jason Momoa. But they didn't. I was like, but
A
for a
huge
second I thought they
HBO
might have
crossover.
because it is HBO. So I
Yeah.
was like, no way. But sure enough, they didn't. But anyway,
Yeah.
um, so that's sort of her dilemma this season.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's been set up but we haven't seen much of it play out yet. We haven't really
Yeah.
seen what she is gonna do about it, but I am interested to see. We certainly haven't seen much of Ethan.
Hmm.
We've only seen him in one episode. We don't know how he feels
Hmm.
necessarily,
Hmm.
but yeah.
Yeah, I think we have seen a lot less of Kat, which is a little bit disappointing. I think she's a really interesting character, and she was had a really interesting storyline in the first season. What I did like is that moment of sort of a commentary from the show about just, I guess, the way that internet perceives self motivation, body positivity, and how maybe that could have, some unintended adverse effects on people, a sort of pressure that begins to build. It's definitely something that I think will, provoke a lot of thought for a lot of people, maybe induce some conversations about, what that scene is trying to say. And I thought it was one of the more definitely interesting sequences of the show so far, certainly, in respects to Kat's character. But yeah, I'm definitely eager to see more of her character. I think there is more to explore there, and hopefully, we'll get to see more of her character. All right, so the next two characters I'm just going to group into one discussion because we haven't seen too much or almost anything from these characters, but I think they're still worthwhile discussion. Leslie Bennett, who is Rue's mother, played by Nika King, and Gia Bennett, who's Rue's sister, played by Storm Reed. I mean, we haven't seen much. I think we've seen, the fact that Rue continues to hide this addiction from her family and, this new quote unquote business deal that she's struck up, I think also is being hidden from her family. And you do feel bad for the family constantly. I think, especially for Rue's younger sister, you know, having to deal with your sibling going through something that traumatic. I think the show captures that well. Joel, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you definitely feel bad for Gia. Um, on one hand, she kind of knows what's going on because she's like, Rue, are you on drugs right now? And she kind of
Yeah.
doesn't take Rue's bullshit. She's like, oh, you're so selfish. But we also see how Rue has the ability to just
Manipulate
completely
her.
manipulate her and make her feel bad by, on one hand convincing her that she's just high on marijuana, on the other hand, sort of suicide baiting, you might say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, you absolutely feel bad for Gia, and that's one of the strongest points I think that shows how badly addiction controls your life is um how much it is devastating to Rue's direct family, who Rue doesn't seem to care much about compared to, the other characters in the show, which is really sad.
Exactly. And I want to just say, Rue's mother, who we see a lot more of in the first season, we haven't seen much of so far. Nika King is also, when she's with Zendaya and doing those scenes in the first season, I think they're very powerful together. And as much as I wouldn't want Rue clashing with her mom in the sense of the characters, I'm excited to see, what Nika King and Zendaya do in terms of performances in the coming season. All right, Joel. Next one is a big one as well. Obviously, Hunter Schaefer plays Jules. And before we get into it, we've been talking about performances, and Hunter Schaefer's was her debut performance, ever, in any TV or film was in Euphoria. So the first season is when she made her screen debut. And I think, I speak for everyone who watched, that was one of the best, I think, performative debuts I've seen in a while. And I think she's only gotten better in this season. So what do you have to say about Jules?
Yeah, Jules Hunter Schafer's acting is incredible. Um, I think her facial expressions are one of the strongest aspects of her acting. I think that she always conveys a lot through her face, through her eyebrows and her mouth, and and everything, more so than even other really good actors.
Yeah.
And as far as Jules's character, it's interesting because, she gets upset when she feels that Rue and Elliot are like maybe flirting or something. But as many people pointed out, it's like, okay, but didn't you like go to your hometown and like make out with that one girl like in that one episode in season one? So how can she be like jealous or something? Like, how is that fair? But I think that the dynamic between Rue and Jules is different this season because they're like kind of official. Like they are
Mm.
actually calling themselves like girlfriends.
Yeah.
They're calling themselves a couple, so it's a little bit different. And I think Rue, I mean, sorry, Jules last season was extremely naive and nonchalant. She didn't see like the dangers or the downsides to things. She was always just like, "Oh yeah, it's whatever." Just like it's fine, whatever. When other people around her were would see it as a problem. And I think in this season we're seeing her more like recognizing problems and like actually trying to address them,
Hmm.
more so than last season. She's a bit less naive, I think. And
Hmm.
she's a bit better at communicating like the issues she sees instead of just like ignoring them like she did last season, resulting in like a mental breakdown.
Yeah, I think you nailed a lot of the big points there. I think we are seeing, I guess, a different side of Jules this season. There was definitely been a lot of development for her character, especially in relation to Rue, and Elliot, who we'll get to soon enough, who's like one of the biggest new characters in the show. Honestly, I don't know quite what to make of her character so far, her journey so far. I mean, within the first four episodes, I think a lot of it has been set up, but yeah, it comes back to that whole thing of whether Rue and Jules should really be together, and they get together in the first episode in the second season. But either way, I think the show has done a really good job of portraying her character and Hunter Schaefer as a performer. I mean, I'm just getting more and more impressed by how great she is in the show. Every episode. So there's definitely a lot to look forward to. We're kind of getting close to the near end of the list, so there's some catch-up characters we should quickly, take a look at here, Joel. And just you don't need to talk about all of these people. Maybe whoever you want to talk about. So Algie Smith plays Chris McKay. We see him pretty briefly in the first episode. Um, Javon Walton plays Ashtray. Austin Abrams plays Ethan Lewis. Coleman Domingo plays Ali. And one of our new characters, Chloe Cherry, plays Faye. Anyone who stands out, Joel, that you want to maybe talk about real quick?
Well, I think Faye is a hilarious character.
She is.
She's just ridiculously over the top. Like
Yeah.
just how like ridiculously stupid she is. It's gold. It's really just gold.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a lot
other
of
than
really
that,
funny moments.
yeah, other than that, we already talked a little bit about Ashtray. We're
And
definitely seeing more of him like
yeah.
taking action in some disturbing ways. And then um for Ali, we see him get like extremely hurt by Rue. I think last season Rue may have said some things, but he never took it personally. He kind of was always like, "Oh, she's just an addict." Like he was kind of above it
Mhm.
and not gonna like get on her level. But I think this time we really saw him like get really hurt. Like I don't know if he is gonna keep talking to Rue or if he's just gonna like give up on her or what, but she was able to like hurt him in a way that we've never seen before. And I'm not sure what his choice will be moving forward, whether he'll talk to Rue or not.
Yeah, I think Ollie's always been a really fascinating character, even obviously in the first special episode. But I do think we see an increasing kind of desperation from him towards Rue, where he clearly sees that she's spiraling, and I think he feels a little bit helpless in terms of trying to protect her, and at the same time, understand where she's coming from. And it's that moment with Rue and Ali, I think, is pretty heartbreaking, for both characters. But I'm always, eager to see what Coleman Domingo does. He's such a restrained performer. He's just a natural professional, absolutely adding to the cast in such a unique way. All right, we have two characters left on the list before we wrap things up, Joel. So first, I want to get your thoughts on Cassie Howard, played by Sydney Sweeney. Obviously, she's a major player. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Cassie's story at the moment is just very sad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, every time I see it, I feel like she's just getting deeper in this hole of just not being able to be alone. She in the beginning she says she wants to be single for a while. Um, she thinks it'll be good for her, but she just can't seem to do it. And she has unfortunately fallen in with one of the worst possible men to be in love with, and she just can't. She just puts everything she has into, pleasing him and wanting to be with him, and it's just sad to see. I wish that she had the power to just, escape the situation and be her own person and be on her own, but so far it just seems like no matter how hard she tries, she just can't get out of that sort of hole.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. I
Yeah.
think she has a very kind of almost tragic storyline going for her this season. And, her relationship with Nate is fraught, to put it very lightly. Yeah, I think there's been interesting things set up here as well. And, I'm almost not eager to see where it goes because it's not going anywhere good. I think she's had a number of really bad breakdowns, and I think she's one of the more beloved characters in the show. I think people always kind of took her side to, in the first season to see her like go through a pretty challenging situation is pretty difficult, but a really good, I think, move to put Nate and Cassie together from a writing perspective. And the way that, they come together, I think is really interesting. I thought the writing did a really good job of that. So our last character on the list is the big newcomer to season 2, Three Nights, Dominic
Yes,
Fike.
3 nights at the motel. Yeah. When I saw the preview and I saw him, I was like, "What?"
So
And
glad
I like,
that on your first appearance on one of my podcasts, Joel, we got a solo out of you.
anytime, it's my pleasure. I'll be here all week. Okay.
He's
But yeah, I think yeah, so as I said, I was super excited to see him. I didn't know he acted. I think he's doing a solid acting performance so far. I
yeah,
think he has a pretty relatable, likable character, and so far I think his role has been pretty lighthearted. I mean,
generally, yeah.
he's a pretty lighthearted character who um sort of hasn't yet been hurt very badly or had to make any like extremely difficult decisions. But I think that's changing, and I think by the end of this season, he'll probably go through some shit, and it'll be interesting to see how his character reacts to that and how the performer is able to handle some more dramatic, um, some more dramatic acting.
Yeah,
But I'm
I
excited to see it.
agree. Yeah, I think so too. And yeah, I think this is Dominic Fike's first screen debut as well. And I mean, it's quite the project to go for. And I think he's doing a good job. Yeah, he fits in naturally with the rest of the cast. I mean, he feels like, he would have existed in season 1, but we just didn't see him. And I think he's doing a solid job. I think Elliot's been a fascinating character. Obviously, his relationship with Jules and Rue has been the highlight. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think he is fairly likable. Yeah, I think, as far as things go, I think he was even honest with Jules in that last episode about knowing that, Rue was going through, addiction still. And I don't know, we don't know what the effect that might have had on Jules, long term, but I think we're interested in seeing how Elliot progresses as a character. He's definitely also very interesting and a good addition to the cast. All right, so that was our last character, Joel. So that kind of wraps up the first 4 episodes of season 2 of Euphoria. Before we start closing out, I want to ask you if you had to pick one character as your favorite so far, and this can be across both seasons, special episodes, everything, and you just had to pick one, which one would it be? Or who would it be?
I'm gonna go with the one you guessed, and it's gonna be Maddie
All
because,
right.
well, for one thing, the costumes and the makeup are just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I would go with Rue, which is a pretty weird slash tough decision because, she's not always taking the best actions. But I do think, the way that she's been written and the fact that, she's loosely based on Sam Levinson's own life, I think adds a lot of humanity to her character. And, as long as I remember having watched the show, whether it be first season, the second season, or, the middle bridge episodes, you always kind of want to like climb into the screen and try to, maybe stop her from doing certain things or, you know, obviously you can't do that, but it's one of those things where I think Zendaya is just so phenomenal as Rue, and she is like the secret, glue of the show. There's so many subplots, but I always feel like the emotional focus feels like it's on Rue. So maybe just from a storytelling perspective, I think Rue is definitely my quote unquote favorite character. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, obviously Euphoria deals with some pretty sensitive material, and I wanted to include this little message here at the end of the episode. So if you or someone you know is at risk of suicide, please call the U.S. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. You can text TALK to 741-741. So I know that this show is pretty rough, so I wanted to include that at the very end. But otherwise, thank you so much, Joel, for joining me on the first leg of our second season of Euphoria Journey. How do you think that went?
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. I've enjoyed the show and I've enjoyed recording this with you. And I'm excited to see what happens in the rest of the season. And I'm excited to get back on the mic and dig into it when we see how it all ends.
Yep, as Joel mentioned, our plan is to have a second episode of this podcast discussing the latter half of the season. Until then, everyone, thank you so much for listening. Joel, thanks for being on the podcast once again, and we'll see you guys next time.